Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, December the 30th, 2024. So, over the weekend there was a plane crash in South Korea, and that's something I want to look at. I want to look at the time that plane crash happened and see if there's anything interesting going on astrologically. And I think I do find something that really we do need to take note of. Now, you might think it's a bit tasteless looking at something like a plane crash or some other disaster. I don't know, maybe it's something about my generation, but, when I was learning astrology in the 1980s, in the class, we'd always look at disasters. I remember I was in London, I think it was 1987, and there was this horrific fire at King's Cross Station, and the astrology class was completely focused on this fire. I remember looking at the chart of the fire. Then there was another disaster when a lot of people were killed in a ferry that went down in the North Sea or the English Channel. It was called the Herald of Free Enterprise. Again, the class really wanted to look at this chart, see what was going on, and that's what astrologers did in the 1980s when I was learning astrology. So, that's what I learnt, and so that's something I want to look at, and I feel it's absolutely appropriate to look at the chart of the precise moment. Happened just after 9 o'clock in the morning on Sunday the 29th, and so that's something I will be looking at. Also today, Monday the 30th, we do have a new moon. It happens quite late in the day, or even in tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, Asia. There is a new moon, and I think that is something I certainly have to look at. So those are the two things I'm going to be considering, the new moon and this plane crash in Korea. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, December the 30th, 2024. Just a brief reminder, if you happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe, because it does make all the difference to the channel, and it doesn't cost you anything anyway. So let's look at what's happening today. So here is the chart for today, Monday at noon, and I've set this for New York. So there you can see the new moon. So the moon and the sun are together in Capricorn, and that is the definition of a new moon, when two planets are conjunct, when the sun and the moon are conjunct. And this new moon, London time, takes place at 10:27 p.m. So London time happens pretty late in the day. It means it's going to happen tomorrow if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Russia. So today or tomorrow there is this new moon, and as far as the Americas are concerned, well, that new moon will happen sometime this afternoon. So new moon is beginning of a new cycle. The moon is no longer waning, it is waxing, and it is appropriate that we go into a new week, Monday. Eventually, it's a new year. New Year's Eve New Year's Day is of course Wednesday. So we go into the new year with a new moon. In many respects, the new year starts today. From a lunar point of view, we shouldn't really start things before the new moon, because it's the end of a cycle. The moon is waning. So if you've got something you're really planning on starting, maybe you should wait till tomorrow, or perhaps a little bit later than that. Because the new moon is really a time of silence where things should be kept secret. After all, the moon is overwhelmed by the sun at that precise moment of the new moon. And so if we've got plans, ideas, we shouldn't necessarily talk about them maybe wait until you can actually see the moon, because obviously when there's a new moon, there's nothing to see. It's dark. So just wait a little bit if you've got ideas that you feel need to be brought out into the open. Now, this new moon is in Capricorn. Of course, there will be a new moon in Capricorn every year, and you could say that the moon is a bit weak because the moon is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is a sign where the moon doesn't really function too well, at least in a sort of an emotional sense, because moon in Capricorn can be a bit mean. It can be rather focused on its own interests, but sometimes we just have to focus on our own interests. And also the moon is, of course, combust. It's close to the sun. So you could argue that the moon is weakened by the fact that it is in Capricorn, by the fact there is a new moon. And, in terms of, what's happening right now in terms of the elements, there is a fairly low level of water. We know that the Saturn is in Pisces, Neptune is in Pisces, but no planets apart from that in water, and instead we've got the Sun and the Moon in Earth signs. So perhaps that's what we're focusing on, the material side of things, making sure all the details are correct. So that may be one aspect of the new moon, but it's not really details. It's just a time when we focus on, what we can touch and what is right in front of us, because that new moon is in Earth signs. Now, I will be going into much more detail later in the video about what this particular new moon is about. Now, as far as other things going on, well, obviously the moon is in Capricorn. London time, the moon goes into Capricorn at 4:37 a.m. So if you're in the Americas, Europe, moon is going to be in Capricorn. Moon is going to be in Capricorn all day. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, then the moon won't go into Capricorn probably until late afternoon. I would have thought. And that is pretty much it in terms of the aspects, except for a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Mars. There's Mercury 1814 Sagittarius, Mars at 220 Leo. So at the beginning of the day, Mercury and Mars are at 135 degrees, are at an 135 degree aspect to one another. So Mercury is obviously the planet of communication. Mars can be quite an aggressive energy, so it might be about being somewhat argumentative. That's certainly possible. And if something irritates us, we might want to let other people know. And we shouldn't forget that T-square, which was such a big feature of last week, is kind of still in operation. Mercury is, it's moving away from the square of Saturn, moving away from the opposition of Jupiter, but it's still there to an extent, and that might mean a certain amount of mental irritation. And if there's something important to say, well, we've got to be careful how we say it. So that's the position of the planets set for New York. Let's just switch focus to Sydney, Australia. Sydney, of course, being a representative of Australia and New Zealand, and I do know that people watch this channel from Australia and New Zealand. So noon in Sydney, you can see that the moon at noon is at 28 Sagittarius. So it's in late Sagittarius, and that means that the first half of the day and more, till 3 in the afternoon, probably approximately 3 in the afternoon, I don't know, something like that, is going to be in Sagittarius before moving into Capricorn, and if you're in New Zealand, it's going to be even later. So in Australia and New Zealand, actually for most of the day, the moon is in Sagittarius before moving into Capricorn. So there's going to be a different emphasis in Australia and New Zealand. The new moon is going to be more about tomorrow, and perhaps the emphasis will be on that moon in Sagittarius. So that means that you have to think about perhaps the moon's square aspect to Neptune, for example. Moon square Neptune can be a bit in the clouds, and some of that self-interest I talked about with moon in Capricorn is just simply not going to be there. Moon is in Sagittarius instead, and perhaps you can afford to be sort of more idealistic, but at some stage the moon will go into Capricorn. Turning to the heliocentric picture, so this is the view when you put the sun at the center of the solar system. And I haven't looked at the heliocentric chart beforehand, which I know I should have done, but here it is. And heliocentrically, the Mars is getting closer to the trine of Saturn. It's not there yet, but over the next few days, Mars will be moving there. And there's a bit of a conflict here, because on one hand you've got Mars making a semi-sextile to Jupiter, and on the other hand you've got Mars making a trine to Saturn. So kind of two different energies there. So Mars semi-sextile Jupiter, there is a tendency to perhaps use too much energy. Mars-Jupiter can kind of go over the top sometimes, but then on the Mars trine Saturn is about trying to calm things down and create a bit of discipline and order. So I would have thought at the moment the Mars semi-sextile Jupiter is possibly going to be the one that predominates, especially when you look at the planet Mercury. So there's Mercury, 1834 Libra. So Mercury, remember, Mercury is a fast mover heliocentrically. Mercury can move up to 5 degrees a day heliocentrically. So Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter, and it is making a square to Mars. So Mercury heliocentrically is very active, and there is a lot to say and a lot of annoyance perhaps to express. And well, it's not just that, it's Mercury's actually making an opposition to Chiron. There is Mercury opposition Chiron. So if you take the view that Chiron is the maverick, then some people might just have things to say, and they might say things almost deliberately to upset the apple cart. I mean, you don't want to do things by the book. You don't want to just follow the crowd. You want to say things that make you stand out. And I think with Mercury trine Jupiter, Mercury opposition Chiron, Mercury square Mars, that's certainly possible. But for our part, from our point of view, we should try not to exaggerate, and perhaps we should be aware of how powerful our words can be, indeed how very disruptive they can be. Anyway, that's the heliocentric picture, and now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for today, which is Monday, December the 30th, 2024, for the 12 signs. Aries. There is a new moon today, and the new moon is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is a very prominent sign in your chart, and in many respects it does represent a new beginning, and it's a time when Capricorns want to focus on what is important, and I think you're really starting to think ahead into 2025. You're thinking about what you would like to achieve, And perhaps, Aries, you should be thinking about, what's happening between, now and the next new moon. Because the next new moon, when is the next new moon? So the next new moon I think is on January the 29th. So pretty much this lunar cycle coming up covers the whole of January. And of course that next new moon is the beginning of the Chinese New Year. But over the course of January, I think that it really is a time to get your ambitions on the road, to really get things moving. And I know that you might be thinking about, the end of the year, preparations, parties, whatever else you do at New Year's Eve. But, the year in many respects, Aries, has started. You should perhaps regard 2025 as already underway. Okay, might be tomorrow, but there might be, and perhaps should be, a certain sort of urgency. And if you do have a chance to do anything useful over the course of a day, then I would have said that you very much should go for it. Now, you have to work in a way that is quite organized, perhaps that is not typically Aries. Try to be methodical, and that might not always be easy. Remembering what I just said when looking at the heliocentric picture, because heliocentrically, Mercury is square Mars and Mars is semi-sextile Jupiter. And with those two heliocentric aspects, you might be encouraged to just be too impatient, be hasty, say something just because you feel it's important at the time. But I would suggest that you try to have a little bit of reserve. Just because you want to say something, Aries, doesn't necessarily mean you have to say it. And at the same time, you might feel quite energized, and it's nice to have a lot of energy, but where are you going to put that energy? And there's just some danger that you put that energy into the wrong places. So I think you can see, Aries, that a certain amount of discipline is required if you're going to make the most of the day's opportunities. And now, as far as other people are concerned, and relationships as well, in general, closer relationships, it might sound at first sight to be a somewhat difficult day, because it's certainly true that you could do things that really upset people. But at the same time, you have a natural ability to get on with people. If you're not in too much of a hurry, if you try somehow to be relaxing. I mean, you may not feel relaxed, but there's something about you that if you just make the effort, can seem like, you're easygoing. I mean, Aries can be an easygoing sign. Just go with the flow to an extent. I understand you have your priorities, but if you do make a special effort to get on with people, then I think they will reciprocate. And it's a time when you can create new connections. And perhaps, in terms of making new connections, you perhaps have to think about your ambitions. I mean, you are ambitious at the moment. I mean, you might be in denial about that, but there are things you want to achieve. And ask yourself, what do you need to achieve and how are you going to do it? And it just may be that in order to get to where you want to go, you're going to need other people's help and cooperation. So if you need that kind of assistance, well, then you should behave accordingly and do what is necessary to cultivate people's friendship and support. And yes, that requires a little bit of discipline, but Aries, I'm sure you can do it. Taurus, the moon is changing signs. The moon is moving out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn, and I would regard that as being a good thing. The moon, when it moves into Capricorn, obviously it's moving into It's moving into your sign. Sorry, it's moving into an earth sign. It's moving into your element. And so with the moon moving into Capricorn, and of course we've got a new moon in Capricorn, that might give you a sense of being in the right place. Yeah, recently there might have been a little bit of a struggle, as perhaps particularly when the moon was in Sagittarius. You might have felt somewhat uncomfortable, and perhaps you were taking things a little too seriously. And with the moon moving into Capricorn, I think that allows you to have a greater sense of perspective, and you start to understand what's important, and also you start to understand that some things that maybe you've taken really seriously are actually quite trivial. I mean, you're still able to look after yourself and you know what's important for you, but you're not so close to the object of your attention. I mean, that can be the case. If you're really close, you just can't see it. But with the moon moving into Capricorn, you can now get a little bit of distance, and you can see the whole object, not just a part of it. And that means, Taurus, that you can start to do things that really make sense, and you're not just focusing on irrelevant details or just focusing on one part of a problem. I mean, if you're just looking at one part of a problem, you can't see the whole problem, and there's a limit to how far you're going to go. And of course there is a new moon in Capricorn. It's not just the moon going into Capricorn, we have a new moon in Capricorn, and this can be a time when Taurians can be I suppose quite spiritual in their own way. I mean, you've already got it with the sun has already moved into Capricorn, and as I've said quite recently, Taurus can be a very spiritual sign, and I think it can have a sense of the living earth. The earth is not just some empty mechanistic thing. It's real and it's alive, and you are part of it. And so perhaps for some Taurians, there can be a sense of belonging, and also a sense of what is preventing you from belonging, and also perhaps a sense of what might be wrong with the system. And you can see that, and if the system is in decay or is being corrupted, and by the system I'm talking about it may be the political system, it may be your community, it may be the natural world, but you're just aware of some of the reasons it might not be working as well as it should be. And it may also be that you get a sense of evil. Now, I don't want to scare you by talking about the sense of evil. I mean, evil is always there. We always have to deal with evil. And I suppose evil is the opposite of growth. Evil is about something which is trying to bring things down, and there are always elements working behind the scenes to bring things down. It may not be that anyone individually is evil, but I suppose people as a group can create something evil. It can almost be like an emergent property. And I don't know whether you want to see evil as sort of in some kind of a spiritual sense, but I think it's just something you are aware of, and you should not be afraid of evil, because evil is just part of the human condition, and I don't think one has to be a Christian to think that either. I mean, I know we talk about original sin and all of that kind of thing, so it goes beyond Christianity or anything like that. I think evil perhaps doesn't even need a god. I mean, it's there, and it is something that you are aware of, and it's something that is perhaps upsetting the peace, and you can see it, and you can feel it. And I suppose it might also be something disconcerting because Venus is still square Uranus. I mean, a couple of days ago we did have Venus square Uranus. In fact, we had Venus square Uranus. I think it was on Saturday. Venus was square Uranus, and that could have been that could have been an unsettling time, and that may be something. But you're still coming out of, feeling that nothing is quite as it should be, and so it's important, therefore, Taurus, that you don't allow this whole thing to get you down. And I return to what I said at the beginning of this piece on Taurus, that it is about getting perspective. If you get too close to something, whether it's good, bad, evil, indifferent, whatever, you could get caught, and you getting caught on details, getting caught on things that are unimportant. They might not be unimportant, but you might exaggerate them. But it's only when you get some distance that you can see the whole thing. Yeah, you can see that there is evil at work, but also there is good at work, and you can perhaps see where you fit in with the entire system, and that should be of some benefit. And Taurus, just a reminder that Mars is getting very close to an opposition of Pluto. I've talked about sort of evil and some of the things that might be wrong around you, and I think Mars opposition Pluto kind of intensifies things. I mean, Mars and this Mars-Pluto opposition is across an important angle of your chart. I mean, from a Taurus point of view, a Leo is angular, Aquarius is angular, you've got Pluto in Aquarius, you've got Mars in Leo. So this opposition is there, and you're perhaps also aware of something of a power struggle that might relate to your family, could relate to your work if that's relevant, and it might also occur to you that some of the people close to you are under pressure. Mars opposition Pluto, and that pressure might be building up. So perhaps you need to find out what's going on, maybe ask a few questions, and there's no point in letting things just simmer away. And perhaps, Taurus, it's not just about you getting perspective, it may be that you have a chance to help other people get some perspective. Gemini, there is activity in the sign Capricorn. The moon is moving into Capricorn. There is a new moon. And so with this Capricorn activity, it may well be that things are perhaps a little more complicated than usual. And, you would like things to be simple, straightforward, understandable, but it's perhaps becoming clear that they're not, and you have to look under the surface and realize that there are just things that need to be understood, and you can't just understand them by skim reading something. Just you read something quickly, you look at a YouTube video, whatever you normally do to understand your world. It should be easy as far as you're concerned, but in this situation, it's not easy. And if you want to get to grips with something, Gemini, you absolutely have to understand that it's going to take time, and you do have to be patient. And today you might not have much patience, especially at the beginning of the day. I mean, well, maybe all day, because we've got two aspects involving Mercury and Mars. We've got geocentrically, we have got Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars, and heliocentrically, we've got Mercury square Mars. So Mercury is your ruler, it hits Mars, so I think that you could be quite agitated, and you want things to be clear, and you want things to happen really now this minute. I mean, that's how Gemini works. You're not in the mood for suspense. You don't want to just wait. You want to know now. You want everything to be clear. And if that's the case, then I think you might be disappointed. And if you're in a hurry for something, you really want it to happen, and you really try to force the pace, well, it's not going to work. And there is a possibility, Gemini, that you could make a fool of yourself. And just remember, I'm a Gemini. I've got my sun in Gemini, so I may be talking to myself here. So a bit of patience is perhaps important, and don't think that you can get all the news straight away. So, for example, you might hear something that gives you information, and you want all the information, and you're not going to get it. You may have to wait a few days. You may have to wait until next year. So be patient, and also try to be self-sufficient. It's might seem easier if you want to find out what's going on to ask people or to get direct answers, but maybe you've got to yourself go on a process of discovery, and you have to really ask questions, not ask questions of other people, but ask questions of yourself, and do research, really go deeply into things. And I suppose at some level use your feelings. I mean, I know that Gemini is not supposed to be the most emotional of the 12 signs, and there isn't a great deal of water in the sky at the moment. Okay, we've got Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, but there isn't much else there. But still, I think that you can feel things, and I think that the Sun and the Moon in Capricorn is perhaps going to help you out. And so don't feel, Gemini, that you have to make your presence felt today. I mean, and I think you might want to, and I understand, Gemini, you've got a lot to say, but I just don't think it's necessarily going to be particularly useful. You could just end up spinning your wheels, or you say things which really don't go down right, or the words don't come out right. And so perhaps as the year draws to a close, you should have a serious approach and be patient, and just not feel that you need to be in too much of a hurry. And this new moon we have, got a new moon in Capricorn today, or it could be tomorrow, it depends on where you are. But with this new moon in Capricorn, it's perhaps a beginning of a period where you can be more serious, when you can, because if you take things seriously, Gemini, other people take you more seriously. The world takes you more seriously, and I think it's the I Ching says somewhere, it says, people that don't take things seriously never come to much. I'm sort of constantly reminded of that. I just kind of regard that as maybe something as an indictment on myself, but I think every Gemini needs to recognize that, because I suppose from an existential perspective, some Geminis, in fact maybe many Geminis, they can end up reducing life to an absurdity. I mean, that's Jean-Paul Sartre. He was a Gemini, and he I suppose from an existential point of view, you ask, what is the point? What is the point of existence? And as a result of those questions, we're coming to the conclusion that existence is pointless and it's all absurd. Then you can end up not taking anything seriously, and even end up not taking yourself seriously. And so the challenge here, maybe it's this annual challenge when the sun goes into Capricorn, when you've got this new moon, Capricorn new moon every year, this annual challenge to look at yourself and to take yourself seriously, and to recognize that if you want to come to anything, if you really want to be taken seriously by other people, if you want to have an impact, then it's important that you don't get caught on this idea that life is absurd. I mean, it's not absurd, regardless of what anyone says, regardless of the conclusions that Jean-Paul Sartre might have come up with. Of course, existential philosophy is more complicated than that, but I'm not a great philosopher. But focus on what matters and give it everything you've got. Cancer. I keep telling you that you're sensitive to the lunar cycle. Maybe you're bored of telling you that you're sensitive to the lunar cycle. I mean, in general, Cancerians are sensitive to the lunar cycle. So new moons, full moons, first quarter moons, last quarter moons. It tends to affect Cancerians perhaps more than other signs. And we do have a new moon. And so as a Cancerian, I think that this new moon is going to have an impact on you, especially as this new moon is in Capricorn is in your sort of opposite sign. So, with this new moon in Capricorn, it just might feel that it's perhaps a new tide of events, and this new tide of events may relate to other people. After all, new moon is in Capricorn. Capricorn is your opposite sign. Capricorn is a sign that is pretty relevant to other people. And so this new moon in Capricorn might allow you to have another look at your social environment, the people you have to deal with, and there could be some changes. It's possible with this new moon that new people come into your life. New people start becoming more important than usual. I mean, generally, new moons are about beginnings. I mean, full moons are about endings. I mean, new moons can be about endings as well, because you're talking about the start of something new, and I suppose very often when something new starts, that means that something else has to end. So there is a certain similarity there, and I think Cancer that you may become aware of what perhaps is restricting you in terms of other people and their needs, and you understand that you haven't got full 100% freedom. It's just not there, and so there could be a sense that you have to make allowances for this. And this new moon, it does actually make a wide sesquiquadrate to Uranus. Remembering that over the weekend there was a Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. The Sun was sesquiquadrate Uranus, and the Moon is sesquiquadrate Uranus. And so, with the new moon sesquiquadrate Uranus, that might be about surprises and things happening, things occurring that you hadn't fully expected. So, in terms of you and the outside world and how the outside world impacts you, you shouldn't necessarily expect that you've understood everything, and information may come your way that is quite surprising. And in terms of other people, it's a time when you certainly shouldn't make assumptions. There's always scope for surprise, but even though there's this new moon in your opposite sign, very much focused on other people, you should not forget your own core interests. The moon is in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn, well, it's in its detriment in Capricorn, so you could say, well, Moon in Capricorn doesn't work particularly well. On the other hand, it says something about how the Moon is operating. And so when the Moon is in Capricorn, it's focusing on itself and its own selfish interests. And that's the way it is. And so you've perhaps got this dichotomy here, Cancer, that you're very aware of other people's impact on you, that you don't have so much freedom, that you do have to an extent accommodate other people, but at the same time you have a selfish streak, and this selfish streak is perhaps coming out into the open. And selfish is this word that tends to be seen as very negative. Being selfish, it's not considered to be a good thing to be selfish. I would disagree with that. There's nothing wrong with being selfish, and you have to be particularly selfish at a time when other people are having a big influence, because if you're not selfish, you could just be overwhelmed, and you do have to think about yourself. And being overwhelmed, that might actually be an issue if you're in Australia and New Zealand, because if you're in Australia and New Zealand for most of the day, in fact, the moon is in late Sagittarius, and so moon in late Sagittarius is making a square to Neptune. So moon square Neptune can be something quite overwhelming, perhaps putting too much emphasis on other people and allowing things to get too chaotic. So that is a picture. That it might be the picture if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but in Australia and New Zealand, still the moon is eventually going to move into Capricorn. So Cancer, yeah, I think it's okay to be selfish to some extent, because if you're not selfish, then there is a danger that you just become overwhelmed, and that is just something that you don't want to happen. And I think it's actually quite unnecessary. And there may come a point with that new moon making the sesquiquadrate to Uranus, whether it's today or tomorrow, where you might have to remind people that you have your rights, that you have an individual way of looking at things, and maybe the best way of reminding people is to just do something a little surprising, something that they hadn't anticipated. And that's often a good idea, because if people are surprised, they're at a disadvantage, and if they're at a disadvantage, you perhaps have it's you who have the advantage, and perhaps you can utilize the situation to put yourself center stage and to make sure that you really are not taken for granted. Leo, it might feel, with this new moon in Capricorn, with the moon moving out of Sagittarius into Capricorn, making a conjunction of the sun, it just may feel that there are just a few things that absolutely need to be done, and you want it done in your own way. And perhaps with this new moon, you're starting to think about how you've been arranging things in the recent past, and maybe you come to the conclusion that things have not been arranged as well as they should have been, and you might therefore want to turn over a new leaf. I mean, that's natural, isn't it? I mean, it's coming up to a new year, as I've already argued. In a way, this new moon is the beginning of the new year, even though it is still just 2024. That this new moon is a time when you want to reorganize things, and perhaps you've got too used to certain routines which aren't really serving any useful purpose. And so, with the new moon, if you want to get yourself together in particular areas, now is a great time to do it. Just start changing things. Don't wait till New Year. Make the changes now, and if by making the changes now, there's a really good chance that these changes can become a permanent part of your life. But don't advertise them. If there are things you want to do, it's important that you just go and do them. I think if you advertise something, you're going to weaken it. So Leo, just do it. I mean, I know that some Leos want to announce things. Maybe they want attention. It's always good to it seems good at least to announce something. Oh, we're going to have a big change. Everyone needs to follow suit. No, the change has to happen in a private way. Other people will notice in the end. So that would be a good way of using the new moon. And the new moon might also have an impact on, your ideas about direction. I mean, direction is important, and you want to do something that's for you, that is also very original. And I think that this new moon reminds you that if you want to do something that's both original and useful, the preparations have to be right. Now, this new moon, from a Leo perspective, might have an impact on your health. And I don't want to be negative. I'm not trying to scare you here. I'm talking about health in a sort of very general way, and I talked about new routines. And these routines may well have an impact on your health. So if you feel there's something you want to put into action now to give your health and well-being a boost, now might be the time to do it. Again, don't wait until the new year. It's not about New Year resolutions. It's all about making a resolution which is astrologically anchored. And so if you make any resolutions today and tomorrow, they are anchored in this new moon in Capricorn. And so if you feel that you've been doing something that's perhaps been undermining your health, remember, I'm not giving medical advice here. If you feel something has been undermining your health, then you might want to cut it out. If you want to introduce some new routine or something new which you feel could help your mind and body, then now might be a great time to do it. Now, as far as vulnerabilities are concerned, this new moon is in Capricorn, and I suppose when we think about parts of a body and Capricorn, I mean, one part of the body you really think about with Capricorn is the knees. And so do think about your knees. Even if your knees feel as if they're in good shape, it may be something you're doing is not helping your knees, could be creating trouble at a later stage. And this is nothing to do with age. Bad things can happen with knees at any age, but it's just perhaps I don't know if you've been doing a lot of kneeling, or I don't know, crouching down, weeding. That's an issue. Yeah, every summer I spend a lot of time picking Scotch broom. I mean, I'm not a Leo, but Scotch broom is this, in the Pacific Northwest, is this major invasive species. It's really, really ghastly. It's just impossible to get rid of the Scotch broom, and it's the Scotch broom seeds. Apparently they live for 90 years, and it's pretty much impossible to get rid of. And every summer there's this blast of yellow in the Pacific Northwest as a Scotch broom just gets everywhere. And you can't just cut the Scotch broom, you have to pull it out. And so, that means if you want to get rid of Scotch broom, you have to, you find yourself kneeling, doing a lot of kneeling. And you can, I don't know, I feel that sometimes I can really destroy my knees trying to get rid of Scotch broom. So that's an example of an activity that can really cause havoc to your knees. So far, so good with my knees. But anyway, I'm going on too much. What I'm saying is that look after your knees and make a special effort not to do anything that is going to cause longer term damage. So that's just a point of vulnerability. I'm not trying to frighten you or anything. I just thought I better point that out. And finally, relationships. There could be some things going on because over the weekend there was a sesquiquadrate between the Sun and Uranus, and and so there was also a square between Venus and Uranus. So the Sun, Venus and Uranus are kind of linked up together, and I think that link is still very much there. And so how is the sun impacted by Venus and Uranus? And so it just may well be that something happens in terms of relationships that wasn't fully expected. Might be good, might be bad. It will probably be exciting. So don't make assumptions about other people. However well you know someone, however long you spent with someone, things can always happen. Things can happen which are good, things can happen which are bad. And so in terms of your various relationships, don't take things for granted and don't assume that things are going to work out as they have done in the past. And today there might be evidence that something is changing for better or for worse. Or maybe it's not about being good or bad, it's something that is completely neutral and it just depends how you respond to it. Virgo, we have the moon moving into Capricorn. And quite when the moon goes and moves into Capricorn sort of depends on where you are. I think for most people watching this, the moon will be in Capricorn all day. If you are in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon won't go into Capricorn until this afternoon. So it kind of depends. But the point is the moon is going into Capricorn, or for most of us actually, the moon perhaps already is in Capricorn, at least for the useful part of the day. So moon going into Capricorn from a Virgo viewpoint, I would have said is something which is to be welcomed, because Capricorn is an earth sign. It's something that you're familiar with. So when the moon goes into Capricorn, you feel a sense of grounding, but you also feel a sense of what you can do, what you can do in a creative sense. And sometimes, Virgo, you can be perhaps a little harsh on yourself, and you think that there's not much you can do, and you perhaps sometimes think that other people can do it better. But I think with the moon in Capricorn, you have the chance to really recognize there are some things you do very well, and you get it right. And so with the moon moving into Capricorn, it's important that you don't undervalue yourself, and that you recognize perhaps your own genius, and additionally your right to enjoy yourself. I think that is something important. You do something that is for you and you enjoy it, and you can almost become part of it. You know what you enjoy, you know what you're entitled to enjoy. So Virgo, I would say, just go for it, and don't ask too many questions. And then the moon moves into Capricorn, and then we have a new moon. And so with the new moon today, or it could be tomorrow, whatever your time zone is, but with this new moon in Capricorn, it is a time to really tune into what you can do and tune into your uniqueness, and don't feel that you have to fight for it. That might be a temptation. You might reach a conclusion, an erroneous conclusion, that if you want to do something that's important to you, it's not going to be automatic. You're going to have to persuade people. You're going to have to argue with them. You're going to have to negotiate with them. And that is perhaps to do with the fact that we've got Mercury, which is your ruler, geocentrically making a sesquiquadrate with Mars, heliocentrically making a square to Mars. And so Mercury is kind of triggered geocentrically and heliocentrically, and that just might encourage you to just make a fight of everything, a verbal fight. But I don't think that's actually necessary. And it may be that the key to having a great day, and this new moon just it does extend into tomorrow, as you finish the year, as you finish 2024, the key to having a good time is perhaps not to announce yourself, not to advertise what you're doing, and perhaps even not to feel that you have to ask permission. Sometimes asking permission can be a bad thing to do. Now, I understand that in certain situations you have to ask permission. You have to ask permission to use someone's stuff. You have to ask permission to enter private property, whatever. But there are some things that you shouldn't ask permission for. You don't have to ask for permission. You know, will it upset you if I do this rather than that? Do you mind if I do that? You know, that kind of thing. Because if you ask permission, what's happening is you're encouraging someone to say no, or you're giving someone an opportunity to say no. And so that means by asking permission, you could be creating a situation where either you feel completely frustrated by the response, or you get yourself into an argument, and that's not a good thing. And it might also be a question of self-respect. In certain situations, you should not have to ask permission. And so that's what this new moon might be about. And it's not just about today or tomorrow. The impact of this new moon arguably lasts really into next year and throughout the whole of January until the next new moon, which is on January the 29th. And so it is about just being yourself and doing what is important to you. And I suppose, as far as relationships are concerned, this new moon is in the 5th house. So I suppose one has to say that the 5th house is sometimes related to romance and new relationships. I'm just saying this because I have to, basically. That depends on your situation, but I suppose that's a possibility. I mean, it's generally seen as being something very fortunate, the 5th house, having the new moon in the 5th house from, however you're looking at this, whether it's from your sun or from your ascendant or from your moon. You've got this new moon in the 5th house, so it's supposed to be a good thing. And indeed, I think it is a good thing. And certainly romance is one possibility if we have to look for all possibilities. But another possibility is just being very creative and doing what is important to you. And creativity can be about art, it can be about music, it perhaps is about returning to the past. That's one way where you could see the new moon. Maybe, Virgo, there's something you're very good at but you haven't done for a long time. You've forgotten about it, and with the new moon you can rediscover it. And I know there's a new moon every year in Capricorn, but it's that time of year when you have a chance to really maximize your creative potential, and perhaps, that does mean having another look at something you're good at. Perhaps you've given up on it, and now it might be another chance to get back into practice. Libra, there is this new moon coming up. I mean, it could be today, could be tomorrow, and this new moon kind of is a little bit grounding. It kind of reminds you of the importance of having something secure on which to base everything. And that might sound a little boring, but grounding is of course the basis for everything. And I think that with this new moon, you might find that you want to put a fair amount of focus on things like home and family. It might not be something you necessarily want to do, but I nonetheless think it might be quite a good idea. I think you know that it's important, and so think about your home and your family. Can you start anything new? The new moon is about beginnings, and there may be a change in your home that you want to institute. I mean, I suppose in certain cases you might look at your home and say, well, we need a new home, or that might be a move. I suppose that's one possibility. Or it could be about reimagining your home. Perhaps the way your home has been structured in the past is not entirely working, and you perhaps have to just reconsider it, and you have to put your own priorities first. I think that does matter with this new moon in Capricorn. Security and feeling comfortable are very personal things, and you can't spend all your time trying to look after other people's needs, other people's concerns, if you're not feeling secure yourself. And so security should perhaps be your number one priority. And this new moon, may also link with the nodes. The nodes are actually becoming quite important at the moment, because the south node is getting really close to the beginning of Libra. Remember, the nodes go backwards, and the south node has been in Libra for quite a long time, and it's about to move into Virgo. And I mean, okay, it doesn't make that change today, but next month the south node will move into Virgo, and the north node will move into Pisces, and this new moon kind of links with the nodal axis, and the nodes are strong at the moment because they're getting very close to the Aries point. South node close to the opposition of Aries, north node conjunct Aries, and you've got the new moon on a cardinal point. And so the nodes are about where you're supposed to be going, how you're supposed to be going about things at a particular time. And I would have thought that with this new moon, you're perhaps feeling a little bit compelled to really root yourself. And I've already said that it is about roots, but I think it really matters, and it is definitely the right thing to be doing. Not just today, tomorrow with this new moon, but over the next month, giving yourself sort of maximum security, while the north node is still in Aries, while the south node is still in Libra, and making sure you get the balance right. As a Libra, balance is important, but there can be a danger that you spend too much time listening to other people, trying to deal with competing forces, and it's hard work, but you at some point do have to think about yourself and put your own security interests first. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I do think that as the nodal axis approaches the Aries point, which it is doing, I think relationships are becoming more important, and you're actually starting to get a greater sense of what is right for you. Indeed, who is right for you. Some people are right for you, other people aren't, and I think that it's beginning to make sense. And also, it's perhaps occurring to you that that some people are under pressure, and this is because Mars is moving retrograde, and it is moving retrograde towards an opposition of Pluto. Now, that Mars-Pluto opposition is going to be exact later in the week, and I will be talking about it in detail. But this Mars opposition Pluto may represent a situation where other people are under pressure, and they are demonstrating the fact that they're under pressure. They may not even know they're under pressure, but I think you can see it. And as a result of this, it just might occur to you, Libra, that some people are hard work, and they might be sort of projecting whatever they're feeling onto you. And that's another good reason why you need to prioritize your own security. And sure, other people matter, but right now you're the one who really matters, and making sure that both your feet are on the ground, that you know where you are, that you're able to look after yourself, that there is a high level of stability. All that, Libra, at the moment, I think is very important. Scorpio. Scorpio, we do have a new moon in Capricorn, and I think this new moon looks to me like quite a good thing. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily a particularly serious or important new moon. I mean, it's not in an angular sign from a Scorpio perspective. It's not in a fixed sign. But I think it can help you in terms of getting your message across. And Scorpios always have things to say. You may not always find it easy to say whatever you want to say, but I think that with this new moon, you really do have a chance to communicate. And of course, communication is something we all do, but there seems to be something in particular you want to get across, and it's not just about some sort of 5-minute conversation. It's about something you perhaps want to get people to understand. I mean, it may not be one thing, it may be many things you want to get people to understand. And I think that with this new moon in Capricorn, there's something about you that is actually quite serious. It's not trivial. And I think that if you make the effort to talk about the things that are important to you, I think that you will naturally get a good response. And it is because of your seriousness. There's nothing trivial about it. And it's just important that you go about things in the right way. Now, I say that because there are two aspects today. We've got Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars. Of course, Mars is your ruler. And we've also got Mercury square Mars. So how can you have two aspects at the same time? Well, the Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars is geocentric. The Mercury square Mars is heliocentric. So Mercury and Mars are lined up, aspecting each other, both in the geocentric and heliocentric systems. And so that might mean that there is a temptation to get annoyed. You feel you want to say something and you say it, and the words come out as being rather angry, and your irritation may be clear. And perhaps you have to think about how you communicate. As I say quite often, Mercury is a planet. The Moon and Mercury are both planets of communication. And Mercury sort of more represents sort of communication from the head, whereas the moon is more communication from the heart. And I think in terms of how you communicate, it's not about your head, it's not about sort of ideas spinning around which you have intellectually worked through. It's about communicating what you feel. And I think that communicating what you feel, but in a serious way, but certainly doesn't come over as being emotional. It just comes over as being very, very heartfelt and sincere. And so I think that's definitely something you can do. And this new moon may also be about short journeys. So short journeys with a purpose. And so it may be that over the next couple of days, there are places you want to visit, and you won't be doing it in any way that is trivial. You'll decide you must visit someone, you must visit a place for a particular reason. And you go there, and it's almost a mission. You go there because whatever, you know why you need to go there. And going to particular places can just make you feel better. Maybe there's somewhere you haven't visited for a long time and it may be really close by and you feel almost guilty about not visiting it. And now you can visit it. Now's the chance. And maybe that's what this new moon is about, or at least part of what this new moon is about. So that would certainly be a constructive way to use the next day or two. Now, the main aspect, or what is the main aspect today aside from the new moon? Well, we can't ignore the fact that Mars is getting closer and closer to that opposition of Pluto. I mean, I've already mentioned it, but I just have to point it out again that I think it's January the 3rd that Mars makes the opposition to Pluto. I think it's about then. So you've got a few days, but it's getting close. I mean, Mars is now just over a degree away from the opposition to Pluto. So I think you're really starting to feel that. And so with Mars opposition Pluto, there is some possibility that you just might feel that things are getting more intense and that you're starting to become aware of power relations. I mean, you've probably felt this before. I mean, there was this Mars opposition. There was a Mars opposition Pluto, I think, at the beginning of November, around the time of the US presidential election. And so you're becoming perhaps aware of the power dynamics of everything. And this awareness is, I suppose, particularly going to be the case if you're working over the new year, or if you've got any sort of business connections or anything to do with business, and where you've got competitors. But I suppose it can also relate to the family. I mean, remember that Pluto is in Aquarius, and so with Pluto now in Aquarius opposition Mars, and Aquarius is a very family orientated sign in the Scorpio horoscope. So with that Mars opposition Pluto, it can be about home as well as work, and who has the power, and that's something you're thinking very hard about. Now, the question you might want to consider is, are you exaggerating? Are you taking things too seriously? And if you are going to use power, is there a possibility that you might use too much power? And this may go back to that heliocentric aspect, or I suppose a geocentric aspect as well, but the heliocentric aspect, Mercury square Mars, it's quite a powerful aspect there. And could you use too much power? Could you say too much? Could you use words in a way that could be very, very damaging? So consider your power, ask yourself how much power you got, and also ask, are you maybe tempted to misuse it? And perhaps you can get what you want in ways that are more subtle, as I've already kind of suggested with this new moon. This new moon, it's about communicating with your heart, not with your mind. And if you go about things in the right way, it is actually a time when you can foster relationships, not confuse or break them. And so try to be positive. Try to look at connections and what can bring you and other people together rather than what makes things different. And don't get too caught up on power dynamics and how much power you have and relative to another person. You might feel that you haven't got as much power as you should, but maybe you're imagining it. And even if you're not as powerful as you'd like to be, maybe it doesn't actually matter, at least in the short term. Sagittarius. The moon is in Capricorn, or at least the moon is moving into Capricorn. Of course, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will be in Sagittarius in your sign for most of the day. But still, it is moving into Capricorn, and that does create a change. And with this new moon in in Capricorn coming up, I hate to say it, but it can relate to very simply can relate to money. And Capricorn is an earth sign. You've got a new moon in this sign. Capricorn is a sign after Sagittarius. So in the Sagittarius chart, again, it is related to money. And so it might represent a new tide of events and realizations relating to the financial arena. So do consider money and consider how it's being spent and what your relationship to money is. And it's just possible that you might develop a new approach. You have to consider your own particular situation. And I'm not going to be specific, but there may be some way in which you've been dealing with money in the past that needs to change. And actually, you may feel a certain sense of optimism, a feeling that if you could just do the right things, then the financial situation could improve, or you could have greater control. It's a time when you don't want to make money more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, it's very simple. You either have money or you don't have money. You don't have to worry about endless complications and agreements and what other people's role is and all that kind of stuff. Just keep it simple. And if you look at things in a very simplistic way, it just may be very clear about what needs to be done. And the new moon might create the possibility of a new income source. I mean, not necessarily today or tomorrow. The new moon does last a few weeks, and it is a time, every year of, obviously the moon is the sun, every year the sun is in Capricorn. Every year there's a new moon in Capricorn, and so this is often a time where Sagittarians can or should be able to sort of turn over a new leaf in terms of how they work with money and perhaps their relationship to the material world. Now, as a Sagittarius, it might sound a little bit demeaning. Sagittarians have got better things to think about than money, but I suppose money is important. You can't completely ignore it. So if you can put a little bit of attention into your finances, I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing. Now, money aside, I think that there are new opportunities coming up, perhaps of a social nature. I think from a social perspective, Sagittarius, I think that you seem to be on pretty good form. I think you know how to relate to the world at large, and you know how to make yourself popular, and you know what to say, and you're perhaps feeling a little less pressurized, money aside, because we have had this Jupiter square Saturn, and Jupiter was exactly square Saturn, and that might have felt a bit of a pain, particularly as Jupiter is moving through Gemini, and Jupiter in Gemini is your opposite sign. It is very much to do with other people, but when Jupiter was square Saturn, you might have felt that your freedom of action was being curtailed, that other people were maybe in your way, that there were conflicts perhaps between certain people, maybe relating to your family as well. But anyway, this Jupiter square Saturn it's still pretty close, but it is separating. Certainly not as strong as it was when it was exact. I think the Jupiter-Saturn square was exact on Christmas Eve, on the 24th. But now that's separating, and that might give you a greater sense of freedom. And and I do think that you're able to come over in a social sense very well. Just to make sure that as far as possible things are happening on your terms, and perhaps try to separate out the social issues and the financial issues. I mean, I don't want to underestimate the financial side of things. I think it is important, but you just don't want. But at the same time, you don't want it to become an obsession. And so, I'm not saying that it's a particularly hectic day. I mean, this new moon, yes, the new moon is about money, but it's not. I don't think it's a super important new moon. As far as other people are concerned, I suppose I have to mention the fact that Mercury is sesquiquadrate Mars geocentrically. It's square Mars heliocentrically. Mercury can represent another person, and so with those two Mercury-Mars aspects, both geo and heliocentric, it just could be that you find certain people irritating. Maybe it's because they talk too much, or maybe they're saying things that you don't agree with them. And what can I say? Well, you can be tolerant up to a point. Just because someone says something you don't like, that's unsettling, doesn't mean you should take it too seriously. And if there's some scope for a disagreement, maybe you just shouldn't engage. Maybe you don't have to. You can just let people say whatever they have to say. And I suppose if you just let people talk, that's a good way of understanding them, isn't it? The less you say, the more you give the other person a chance to say what's on their mind, and that gives you a chance to also evaluate them and perhaps make a decision about how much contact you want to have with them in the future. Capricorn, we have a new moon, and this new moon is in your sign. And so the Capricorn new moon, I would have said, is largely favourable. I mean, it represents very much the beginning of the Capricorn season. Okay, I understand that the sun has been in Capricorn for over a week, but the new moon represents a new beginning. New moon is in Capricorn. Mercury will quite soon be in Capricorn. I think Mercury moves into Capricorn. When does Mercury move into Capricorn? I think it's January the 6th. I think. Is it January the 6th? No, it's later than that. It's January the 8th. So Mercury is about to move into Capricorn. So this new moon, I think Capricorn for you is a beginning, and I think that you can perhaps say goodbye to the past. And I know that 2024 is still with you. There is a day or two left of 2024, but in a way, the new moon represents the new year for you, because it's a beginning and it's a Monday, or okay, it could be a Tuesday, depends on where you are. But you can perhaps now, with this new moon, say goodbye to the past. It's over, and you can now sort of consider new possibilities. And I think that with this new moon, you're likely to be sort of more definite than usual. Over the last couple of days, you haven't been too certain about what you wanted. Even if you did know what you wanted, you weren't very clear about it. There was always this certain sense of ambiguity there. But now, with the new moon in Capricorn, you are clear. And when Capricorn is clear, that is it. They're super clear. And you possibly don't want to waste any more time. And you have your targets, you have your goals, and you just want to go ahead and achieve them. And I think, Capricorn, that you're actually going to be able to expend a considerable amount of power in terms of getting what you want. And it may actually be surprising. Capricorn perhaps has a reputation for being sort of slow and considered, but with this new moon, I think you can actually be surprisingly dynamic. So when people are not moving, you perhaps have a capacity to make them move, and you can assert the full force of your personality if need be. And I think that once you do assert the full force of your personality, if it's necessary, then I think, straight away you're going to be taken seriously. And in that sense, I think that you can demonstrate a certain amount of leadership. And I think, and it's because of part of it is because of your clarity. You're very clear what you want, and you can be dynamic. And so I think that, over the course of a day, you really can, not just over the course of a day, but as we move over the next few days, if you move from 2004 to 2024 to 2025, it's all going to be very clear what you want. And in terms of any relationship you're in, I think it's going to be a situation where you're very much in control, and it's very important that you make the decisions, and you don't have to be anywhere that you don't want to be. I mean, you perhaps also, Capricorn, should consider where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. There are certain places where you are completely strong, where you're just impossible to beat. There are other places where you are weak, and you know where those places are, and so you can make these decisions. And so stick to territory where you know the rules. There's absolutely no need to stray onto alien territory. I mean, I think there might be an encouragement to go somewhere you're not familiar with. I suppose we're thinking about, if it's January the 30th, I suppose we're thinking about the New Year's Eve, aren't we? I suppose people sometimes have parties on New Year's Eve, don't they? New Year's Eve parties. I would have said New Year's Eve parties, go to your New Year's Eve party, sure, if there's an invitation, but only go there if you're completely familiar, if you completely know the lay of the land. If you don't know the lay of the land, don't go. Familiarity really does matter. And so if you're familiar with things, you're going to be super strong. If you go somewhere where you don't know the rules, you don't know where you're going, then you're just weakening yourself for no reason. And you just shouldn't forget, there's a new moon today, or could be tomorrow, and that new moon should, Capricorn, be putting you in a very strong position. And if you need to assert yourself, even if you need to assert yourself dramatically, I think you're going to be able to do it very well and, very effectively. Aquarius. Aquarius, you might feel that it's a time when you don't fully get what's going on. There's a certain feeling of estrangement. I mean, estrangement needn't be a bad thing. I mean, you can't be connected all the time. Sometimes you just feel that there is a certain lack of connection. And if that's the case, then it's okay to just accept the situation, not make a special effort to be sociable, to be with people. You can do things your own way and do things that you feel comfortable with. And, this new moon in Capricorn, whether it happens today or tomorrow, perhaps reminds you of your own independence and the importance of your own space, and perhaps even the joys of a little bit of solitude. I mean, I know that solitude sometimes has a sort of bad reputation, but there's nothing wrong with solitude. And I think it's a time of year when solitude can be very useful, very comforting. It is a difficult time for many people, as one year comes to an end, another year starts. It can be a time of memories, it can be a time of uncertainty, And it's therefore a time where you just don't want to be in the thick of things, do you? And so that might be your approach as you move into 2025. Just feeling that you can let other people do whatever they feel they have to do, but you can just be yourself. And I think that is quite possibly the best way of using the new moon, and just reflecting. I mean, that might be all there is to it. And as you reflect, it might occur to you that certain things need to change. I mean, remember, this new moon is sesquiquadrate Uranus, and so that new moon sesquiquadrate Uranus might encourage you to look at your immediate environment and perhaps to ask yourself what needs to be changed, because I think it might occur to you that something actually does need to be changed, and it's not something you have to discuss. It's something you realize in your own way. It's very clear to you, and over the next few weeks, you perhaps have the chance to, just make the changes that are necessary. So perhaps it is a time for quiet and for quiet realization, and that might be it. I mean, if you want things to happen, though, Aquarius, I mean, you can certainly make things happen. It's not that you're in a weak position. If you feel you want to push yourself, if you feel you want to draw attention to yourself, you can certainly do it. You can do it in a way that actually might be very dramatic. But I don't think it's really anything you really want to do. And so Aquarius, I would have said just do what you're comfortable with, and just don't allow yourself to be pressurized, and that's probably the best way of dealing with the day's energies. Pisces, we have the moon moving into Capricorn, and we have a new moon in Capricorn, and it is a time of year when a lot of people are quite sociable, and it's a time of year when Pisceans can be sociable. I mean, the sun is always in Capricorn on December the 30th, and it's also always going to be in Capricorn on New Year's Eve. And so in terms of your social life, and I don't know if you're going to parties, meeting people, wishing people Happy New Year, all that kind of stuff, it all looks good. It all looks as if it's moving with this moon in Capricorn. And it's also a new moon in Capricorn. And with the new moon in Capricorn, Pisces, you might feel that it's a time when you want to maybe make some new friends. Nothing wrong with doing that. I think that you're going to be maybe more sociable than usual, and you'll just be, Pisces, just naturally connected. You'll just know how to form connections without really having to try. And it's just important to do things in a way that is natural and spontaneous, and maybe that doesn't require too much talking. I mean, too much talking could spoil things, actually, because today we've got Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. Geocentrically, we've got Mercury making a square to Mars, heliocentrically. And so with these Mercury-Mars contacts, that might be about talking too much and talking to the point where something gets spoilt. Because what you're really looking for is just making connections, making it clear that you're there, and people know you're there, and people like you, and nothing much has to be said. And new moon in Capricorn, it's quite a sensible new moon in Capricorn. Capricorn is a sensible sign. Socializing with people up to a point. You just have to make your presence felt. And maybe there's a sense in which you don't necessarily want to outlive your welcome. Once you've made the connection, once you've made the connection, you can just move on to something else. And so I suppose from a social perspective, that might be about keeping busy and keeping moving. But the new moon can represent a new tide of affairs. And so with, let me just turn my phone off, sorry about that. With the new moon can represent a new tide of affairs. And so that could be about visiting somewhere for the first time, perhaps meeting people for the first time, and suddenly realizing that you feel very comfortable, and you feel connected. And again, there is nothing much that really has to be said. And so that could set you up nicely for the new year. And this new moon is not just about socializing, it's also about what you want for the future. Because what's happened is that the moon has just been in Sagittarius, and so when the moon is in Sagittarius, it could be a time when you're just thinking about what you want in terms of perhaps ambition. Just a few days where you were thinking about that, and then moving into Capricorn, it becomes more intense than just ambition. It's not just about ambition, because ambition is rather one-dimensional, two-dimensional. It's when you start moving and start to think about things in a completely different way. You're thinking about not just your ambitions for the present and the near future, but about perhaps the far future. What kind of future do you imagine for yourself? And the new moon can be, in this case for you, about your hopes and wishes for the future. And so over the next month, between now and the next new moon, just think about this future. What would you like things to be? How would you like things to be in, say, 5 years' time? And what can you do now over the next month to get you nearer to that longer-term ambition, which isn't just plain ambition in a material sense. It's ambition which is more spiritual. It's more about who you are. It's a reflection of what you're on this planet for. And so that might be something you want to think about and try to be as aspirational as possible as you can with this new moon in Capricorn, and not just think about the immediate future. It's about the foundations for your future happiness. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the last Monday of 2024. And now I want to consider the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 39, which is obstruction. That's possibly not the kind of hexagram you wanted to see. And it does indicate that things might be slower than expected. And if we want things to move, we might be disappointed. And, we might have big ideas about how much progress we can make today. Might be lots of things we want to accomplish, but it may be hard work. And this hexagram obstruction has 4 moving lines. Now, 4 moving lines is quite a lot of moving lines. So regardless of what the hexagram is, that suggests that there is quite an active day. It's quite an active day. There's quite a lot of toing and froing. And so the way it seems to work, we've got the first line moving, bottom line, that's a bottom line moving, second from a bottom line moving, the third from a bottom line moving, and then the top line moves. So, what does that all mean if we try and put it all together? So that bottom line means that, we're trying to make progress, but we have to just accept that we're not going to get what we want, and we need to sort of hold back. And with obstruction, what do we do? We perhaps stay where we are, get some assistance. That's one approach. Or we could just retreat. And there's certainly nothing wrong with retreating. And okay, there might be some indecision here. Second line moves, maybe it's okay to move forward gingerly, but we're not very sure of ourselves. And then the third line moves, that represents full-scale retreat. And so I think we have to accept this, and there might be a stage in a day where we just reach a conclusion where really nothing can be done, that we've done all we can, but making lasting progress is really hard work. Then the top line moves. Now, with the top line moving, there's some controversy about what this top line moving actually means. In the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, the top line is actually moving is seen as being quite positive. It suggests that we have retreated. We've made a decision to retreat, almost in a hermit-like kind of way, and then there is pressure for us to go back into the world, to have another go, and we're going at it with the right attitude. We're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for the common good. We're doing it for society. It's because we are needed. The hermit reluctantly returns to the hurly-burly of the real world and has to deal with it all, and then that is the right thing to do. So that's one approach, but there is an alternative approach which says no, it really is retreat. It's a top line. And so I think we have to sort of look at it in terms of a sort of case-by-case basis. What is the cause for us thinking that we should plough on with something? I mean, are we just being stubborn? We're going to give it one last go. If we take that approach, then forget it. But if we really are like the hermit and we don't want to be involved, and there is pressure from outside for us to get involved, perhaps we're needed, and it's something we do where we are just being completely selfless about it, maybe then that might be a time when we actually have to re-engage. So it kind of depends on the situation. But overall, with obstruction, I think we have to accept that it's going to be difficult to make much progress. We maybe need some outside help, and perhaps we should consider just plain retreating. Now, with 4 lines moving, that means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram 61, which is inner truth. And inner truth, this is a hexagram we've had pretty recently, and perhaps after all of this drama trying to make something happen and it not happening, we reach a point where we understand inner truth. We understand what is possible, we understand what is not possible, and we understand the limits of our power. And perhaps we also accept that our power is not total, and that perhaps other people have more power than us. And in certain situations it may be about the acceptance that we are working under some kind of superior, higher authority that is very natural. And I think also within a truth, if something is impossible, something is really difficult within a truth, we can get people to understand. Now, it may be that certain people are being unrealistic. They think that a lot of things are possible, and they don't realize how difficult things really are. And I think with inner truth, we can be very responsible, and we can finally explain to people who in the past hadn't listened to us what really is possible. And finally, yeah, they will listen to us. People will listen because, the I Ching talks about pigs and fishes in the I Ching, at least in the Wilhelm translation, as it talks about these animals that are very difficult to control, and very difficult to get through to, so difficult to tame. But even the pigs and fishes will listen. So if we're in a position of authority, or we feel we need a position of authority, yeah, I think it's a time when people will understand the truth, and certainly we can understand the truth, and we can understand, what's possible and what's not. And now it's time to go back to the astrology, and the first thing I want to look at is the plane crash in Korea. As I said at the beginning, I understand that some people might regard this as somewhat tasteless, that one shouldn't pore over a tragedy, particularly as it's a tragedy that's just happened. On the other hand, as far as I'm concerned, this is the bread and butter of astrology. This is what astrology is all about. You look at an event and you try to make sense of it astrologically, and I think that seems to be the right thing to do. And this is a very serious event. I mean, you saw the news. I think the first news said that 23 people had been killed, and by the end of it, it was 170 something people had been killed, and there are only 2 survivors. So this is an unfolding tragedy, which has just got worse and worse as time has gone on. So let's find the chart of the crash. So here is. So here it is. So this happened on Sunday the 29th, 2024 in Muan International Airport. I have several times. Some reports say it was 9:03. Some reports say it's 9:07. So, I've gone for 9:07. I think that's what Wikipedia said, 9:07. But it could have been 4 minutes earlier. I mean, it seemed to be an ongoing crash. The plane landed, and I think there'd been a bird strike. And so when exactly do you take the time of the accident? That 9:07 is a time that has come up, which that's a time I'm going to use. You may think that there's a different time. So how does that chart occur to us? Well, first thing to note about that crash, the thing that looks really obvious is Mars and Pluto, isn't it? I mean, we've got this Mars-Pluto opposition forming, and the Mars-Pluto opposition, I think, is exact on the 3rd. So Pluto is pretty close to the ascendant. Mars is pretty close to the descendant. So with that Mars-Pluto opposition, I suppose you might associate Mars-Pluto with a bad event, and I suppose you could link it with a plane crash. And then you've got Uranus. Uranus is not exactly on the descendant. It's 5 degrees off, but you do normally associate Uranus on an angle with a plane crash. So I suppose that fits. And remember we were talking about the weekend, and we were talking about this T-square, and I was suggesting that this T-square over the weekend might be something of a problem, and indeed it certainly was a problem. So there is Saturn square Jupiter, Moon is opposition Jupiter, Moon is square Saturn, Moon is exactly square Saturn, and Mercury is square Saturn. So there was this T-square picked up by the Moon. So if you remember, in fact, this Jupiter-Saturn square is being triggered by the Moon and Mercury. So if you remember to August of last year, at the time, I think it was on the day of the Jupiter-Saturn square, there was that boat, the Bayesian, off Sicily, just got caught up in this water spout. There was a storm at, 4 or 5 in the morning, and a lot of people on board were killed. Of course, we don't have the casualty count that we have here, with 170 something people killed. But I suppose that Jupiter-Saturn square was activated by the Moon and Mercury, so that sort of helps explain it. Now, when I look at this kind of chart, I'm interested in the midpoints, and so I'm interested perhaps in the structure of Uranus. What was Uranus doing when this crash happened? So if you look at this chart, you'd see that you've got the ascendant and the midheaven, and so the ascendant midheaven midpoint is often a point that you really should be looking at. So you check, the ascendant midheaven midpoint is the time and the place. So that can really matter, and so I want to consider the ascendant midheaven midpoint. So what would the ascendant midheaven midpoint be? So you can see by eye if the ascendant is 28, and so the ascendant and the midheaven are about 70. So you've got the midpoint would be about 23 degrees Sagittarius. So the ascendant midheaven midpoint was 23 Sagittarius. So that means that Uranus is actually quincunx 150 degrees the ascendant midheaven midpoint. Now, with midpoints, you normally use the hard aspects, conjunction, square, opposition, semi-square, sesquiquadrate. You don't normally use the quincunxes, but I think the quincunx might be relevant. And so, from a midpoint point of view, I thought it'd be useful to look at the 30-degree dial and the 45-degree dial. So, turning to the dials. So, if we look at the dials, 90. That's a 45-degree dial, and let's just create let's start with the 30-degree dial. So remember, with the 30-degree dial, you put everything on the dial in terms of its degree in the zodiac. So Uranus is at 23. So Uranus is at 23. Uranus is at 23 Taurus. So you just put Uranus at 23 degrees and you forget the sign. Likewise, Pluto is at 1 degrees Aquarius. So you just put it at 1 and you just ignore the sign. And so we want to look at the state of Uranus at the time. So we look at the symmetry of Uranus. So you can see that Uranus was on the ascendant midheaven midpoint on the 30-degree dial. So the ascendant midheaven is the time and the place. Uranus on the ascendant midheaven midpoint is an accident at the time and the place, which is this airport. And on the 30-degree dial, look at Mars and Saturn. There is Mars-Saturn represent the death pair. So you could say that you've got Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So you had on the 30-degree dial, you had Uranus on the ascendant midheaven midpoint, and the ascendant midheaven midpoint tells you where it happens. Because Uranus is going to be on the Mars-Saturn midpoint all weekend. I should have mentioned that actually, but I didn't. I should have noticed that. Uranus was on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and that was a deadly time, but exactly where over the weekend? Of course, as I'm speaking, I'm actually doing this video on a Sunday morning, so the weekend is still with us. But Uranus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and so that is about death through accidents, explosions, and so forth. Turning to the 45-degree dial, so here is the 45-degree dial. The 90-degree dial, which is normally used with midpoints. So let's go back to let's go back to Uranus. Where's Uranus gone? There's Uranus. You can see that Uranus is still on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and it's not just on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's because we had the Moon and Saturn were, the Moon was in Sagittarius, the Moon was square Saturn, and it was picked up by Mars. So from a midpoint perspective, I think we can see the drama. I mean, Uranus was only 8 minutes off the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and so that strikes me as being pretty close. And yeah, and using the 30-degree dial, we get to it to being on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. Now, as far as other things to look at with the accident, it's a good idea to look at the prenatal full moon. So what did the full moon look like prior to the accident? So this accident took place in Muan, South Korea, and so if we want to look at the prenatal, the pre-event full moon, we can do that. So there's the prenatal full moon. We see something here because the midheaven was at 15 degrees for Pisces. Saturn was at 13 Pisces. So Saturn was on the midheaven. So, that indicates that something bad was going to happen, perhaps. And look at Jupiter. Jupiter was square the midheaven. So we could have used astrocartography to say that something might happen on that meridian line. Let's just look at the map of the world just to show you what I mean. Astro map. We'll go for Korea. So if we do, you see there is a precise line going through, but it doesn't go exactly through Korea. So what I'm basically saying, it would have been actually very difficult to say before the event, there was going to be an accident in Korea. I think it would have been difficult. That's always the problem. I suppose the criticism of this kind of astrology is that one is kind of using 2020 hindsight. But still, I thought the midpoints were quite interesting, with Uranus being exactly on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I know people are dying all around the world, but this was a very serious plane crash. It was a serious loss of life, and obviously a very tragic event for Korea. And now I want to look at the new moon. So there is a new moon this evening or tomorrow, and this new moon depends on where you are. So here's the chart of the new moon. So I've set this for London, and so London, December the 30th, 2024, 10:27 p.m. is our new moon. And this new moon takes place at 9:44 Capricorn. So the question is, what is this new moon about? Is it an important new moon? I'm not saying it is necessarily an important new moon, at least in itself. And I mean, what are the main aspects here? Does anything really aspect this new moon? I mean, not particularly. You could say that the new moon is sextile Saturn, which is, very widely sextile Saturn. I mean, I would have said 5 degrees off for a new moon is not particularly impressive. Then it does make a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, and that's probably the aspect that matters. So the sesquiquadrate is just over a degree. But there's some 135 degree aspect to Uranus. So it might be a new moon that is a little bit unsettling. And in terms of the 90-degree dial, I think it is important to look at the new moon in terms of this 90-degree dial. And so here is the 90-degree dial for the new moon, and so there's a new moon at 9 degrees 44 Capricorn. So the question is, what midpoints is this new moon on, and does this give us any sort of added sort of information? So there's the dial, and the midpoints that come to mind it's on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint, and it's on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So we have got a Mars-Pluto opposition forming. So on a 90-degree dial, a Mars-Pluto opposition will come over as a Mars-Pluto conjunction. So there's our Mars-Pluto. And then it's picked up by Mercury. So there's symmetry between Mercury on one side and Mars-Pluto on the other. And so this new moon is about communicating something. And it's about but it could be about the communicating threats. There is a sense of power and violence about this new moon, or at least the threats of power and violence. And it is quite a manipulative new moon. And I suppose you could say that, politically, and to run up to Trump becoming president, you can think of all the machinations that might be going on in the world with this new moon, and people really trying to assert themselves, and politicians trying to control the agenda. That's what it's about. The big, for example, in terms of the big events in the world, whether it's Syria, the Middle East, whether it's Ukraine, people really trying to push a certain narrative, and there are sort of going to be narratives happening all over the place. And of course, people are going to be trying to prove their point. With new moon on the Mercury-Mars midpoint, new moon on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint, trying to make your point, trying to communicate through acts of violence. That is certainly a way of looking at it. Now, the thing about this new moon, there is a quite subtle aspect that this new moon has, which may not be immediately obvious. Now, I don't know whether you can see this, but if you look at the new moon here, you notice that on this dial there's a square to Mars. So what that means is this is a fourth harmonic. So there is actually a 16th harmonic conjunction between the new moon and Mars, and it's actually quite a close conjunction. And again, that might not be immediately obvious, but if we change the dial to the 45-degree dial, you'll see what I mean. So this is sometimes in Uranian astrology, they sometimes use this 45-degree dial. And there's a new moon, and you will see that the new moon is exactly opposition Mars. And so with a new moon exactly opposition Mars, again, on the 45-degree dial. So that means that underneath, if we really dig deep, we can find this potential for violence in the new moon that wasn't there in the original chart. Okay, we had the new moon sort of aspecting Uranus, but it was quite a wide aspect, but with a 135-degree aspect. But this 16th harmonic aspect between the new moon and Mars, I think, is something that we really need to look at. And so I've already looked at it. I think it could be a new moon that may be quite violent. And of course, this chart is set for London, and So look how the midheaven is actually connected. We've got the midheaven making this aspect to Mars and the North Node. So maybe London may be a place where that potential for violence actually is realised. I don't know what the UK is doing. I don't know what, that might be an act of violence. It could be the UK committing an act of violence. I mean, the UK has been quite warlike in terms of its attitudes to Syria and Ukraine. There's plenty of potential for things to backfire there. And I suppose this raises a question, where in the world is this new moon, likely to manifest? Could it manifest? So let's look at the astrocartography of the new moon. So let's create I'll create a map. So here is here are all of the places. I think you can see this. All of the places where the new moon is on the south, or is on the IC at the bottom of the chart. You can see that this goes right the way through Europe, and this goes through the Balkans, it goes through Greece, it goes through Romania, it goes through Western Ukraine. So this might be a potential trouble spot in Europe. In the UK, Jupiter's on the midheaven in Dublin. I don't know. I think the UK, looking at that micro aspect with Mars, is a bit concerning, but possibly the parts of the world that I might be especially interested in is, there is Europe, but we also, I'm afraid I'm guilty. I'm very often guilty of forgetting about Africa, and of course this line goes through the Egyptian Libyan border, goes down through Africa. So this might be a part of the world that we perhaps should be looking at. I mean, let's blow up Europe. I mean blow up Europe as in get a closer map of Europe. So there you can see this line goes through Romania, Bulgaria, Western Ukraine, far west. So the battles are happening east, not through the west, and going through Belarus and through the Baltic states. I mean, what are the countries to focus on? I mean, Romania has had problems recently, had they? Because they didn't like the results of the first round of the Romanian election, so they cancelled them. And then so that Romania might be a country that we need to be thinking about, and Bulgaria. And so could Romania, Bulgaria, I would have said, two countries to consider, and how this new moon does impact them. And let's now look at some charts about people who might be affected by this new moon. So I suppose I have to mention Taylor Swift. As you know, I'm not particularly interested in Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift has her Mercury at 9 degrees Capricorn, and that Mercury is conjunct, you can see it's conjunct Neptune. In fact, that Mercury is on the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. So although I don't have a time of birth, that new moon does impact her Mercury. I mean, she has a Mercury-Jupiter opposition. Mercury-Jupiter opposition seems to work very well for her in terms of, I suppose, production of music and money. That works well for her. So she's got the new moon on Mercury. So maybe she'll have some realizations, she'll have some ideas. I don't know. I'm not particularly interested in Taylor Swift. Donald Trump, well, things are always happening with Donald Trump, aren't they? So turning to Donald Trump's chart, he has his Mercury at 8 degrees 52 Cancer. So the new moon is opposition his Mercury. And so with that new moon opposition his Mercury, and don't forget he's got Uranus sesquiquadrate his Mercury. So his Mercury is actually under a lot of pressure, and it might be about what he says. I know we've got all these dramas about visas, and I haven't really been following H-1B visas and about what exactly Trump's policy is. And of course the Democrats are trying to claim that there's some big division in the Republican Party about these visas, so that might be part of it. But in general, with this new moon, you can imagine it's a period of mental tension for Trump as he prepares to become president. And so I suppose that new moon may just be talking about the kind of pressure that he's currently under. Now, someone else who might be under a certain amount of pressure is Barack Obama. So here's Barack Obama's chart. Now, on the surface, we see that Barack Obama. This new moon is at 9:44 cardinal. On the surface, it doesn't look as if anything's going on with Barack Obama's chart, but I think something actually might be going on with Barack Obama's chart. Now, so let me just explain why. And the reason why would be that if we put his chart in the middle and we put the new moon on the outer wheel, it's Mars. Mars is closely conjunct his Mercury at the exact time of the new moon. Now, it's actually conjunct his Mercury Black Moon Lilith conjunction. So yeah, Obama has Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith. And so with this Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith, there is a possibility that, you think of dark thoughts, don't you? That's one way of looking at Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith. What is he thinking? What is he planning? And Mars is on this. And remember, that Mars is making a micro aspect of a new moon by 16th harmonic aspect to the new moon. So that means that the new moon is making a 16th harmonic aspect to his Mercury and his Black Moon Lilith. So what is Barack Obama planning? I think he's probably quite angry at the moment. I don't think he's going away. You've heard these stories that the Barack Obama alliance has gone. Barack Obama's not going anywhere. If I remember rightly, Barack Obama's progress mid-heaven at the time of the election was exactly conjunct his Jupiter. So Barack Obama's not going away, and I think we've seen that with the progress mid-heaven conjunct his Jupiter at the time of the election. And this is a new set of goals for him, plus the fact that he's got Mars on his Mercury. So I think he's angry, he's thinking about things, he's planning things. So we won't know about it. I mean, I suppose he might say something, but I don't think we should expect that. But don't think that Barack Obama has gone away. And RFK. RFK, we don't know what time of birth he is, or do we? Some people are very adamant that that RFK has his ascendant at 2 degrees Leo, but his time of birth was 5:32 p.m. I'm not entirely convinced, but because it's categorized as a C rather than an A or a B in the Rodding system. And so you really want to look at sources at times which are A or a B. You don't want to go for C's. But anyway, assuming that was his time of birth, 2 degrees 15, he has got Mars rising at the time of the new moon, and of course that Mars will be making the 16th harmonic to the new moon. So that suggests perhaps for RFK his agitation. Maybe he's asking himself how much power does he have in the Trump regime as he prepares for whatever role he's been given, looking after food, was it food safety or whatever he's been given? I forget what the precise title is, but he might be impacted by the new moon. Now, looking at events, well, I don't know. We think about Ukraine, and Ukraine is a country that is very inspired by its nationalist past. And I was thinking about the chart of Stefan Bandera. So Stefan Bandera was one of the people who founded Ukrainian nationalism. He had a sort of rather ambiguous relationship with the Nazis. I mean, at one time he courted the Nazis. Actually, I think he was sent to a concentration camp as well. But Stefan Bandera was a nasty piece of work. He helped inspire some of the massacres of Poles by the Ukrainians, and he's considered a hero in Ukraine, so he could be a symbol of Ukrainian nationalism. And he has his sun at 10 degrees 25 Capricorn. I mean, he's been dead, obviously, for a long time. I think the Russians killed him in the late 50s in Munich. They assassinated him. But he has his sun at 10:25 Capricorn. So the new moon is kind of on his sun. So I think that this new moon, in terms of Ukraine, may somehow be really boosting the sort of the Stefan Bandera's the philosophy of nationalism, bordering on bordering on fascism, however you want to see it. The sort of the unpleasant history of Ukraine and its roots and its nationalism may be stirred up by this new moon, because it is Stefan Bandera's birthday on January the 1st, and there is this new moon which is very close to his sun. So that's something we perhaps need to look at or need to consider in terms of what's happening in Ukraine. And I think that Ukraine is something very difficult is happening in Ukraine, as defeat seems increasingly likely, and that the regime is becoming increasingly desperate, and we're seeing them sort of considering increased acts of terrorism just in this, as they're up against the wall. And so I think it is the danger of this period in the war is highlighted by the fact that this new moon is on Stepan Bandera's sun, because he was born on January the 1st, 1909. There is other countries, just to cut very quickly. Australia. I'm not going to say much about this because I haven't really got much to say, but Australia as a federal country came into being on January the 1st, 1901. And so this new moon is, therefore, it could be argued, is on Australia's sun. And so Australia hitting that Sun-Saturn conjunction, it could be a new beginning for Australia, or a set of events in Australia, it just may have an impact on the country. I'm sorry to be so vague. I haven't really thought about it. Obviously, I don't know very much about Australia, but if you are Australian, perhaps you need to think about what that new moon might mean for your country. And another country that might be impacted is England. 1066 chart. The UK was born on December the 25th, 1066, arguably, when William the Conqueror was crowned. Now, in terms of the Gregorian calendar, that switches to December the 31st, 1066. So, in other words, the new moon is on England's sun, because England's sun on Christmas Day, 1066, when William the Conqueror was crowned, was 9:55 Capricorn. So, new moon on England's sun represents something important for the country. And I think that, again, I'm thinking about that 16th harmonic square with Mars. I don't think that this new moon is necessarily positive for England, for the UK. I think it does represent heightened drama, heightened violence. Not quite sure where that violence is going to fall, but I will be looking at that. I will be looking again at this chart over the next week or two. I should also mention that this new moon hits Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the British Conservative Party. She was born on January the 3rd. She's been in trouble by she accused the Reform Party of not being truthful about its membership, and that seems to have been a mistake, because I think the membership figures were correct. So Kemi Badenoch has really made a bit of a fool of herself, and I'll be looking at Kemi Badenoch's chart probably in a few days' time. Now, one country that seems to be impacted by this new moon in several different ways is Slovakia. And Slovakia is a country that has several charts. And I've looked at Slovakia in the past, and all of these charts seem to be impacted by this new moon. So one chart you could take for Slovakia is the chart for March the 14th, 1939. Now, this was a chart when Slovakia became a nominally independent country, but as a sort of puppet regime of Nazi Germany. So it kind of had its independence from Czechoslovakia, because when basically the Germans occupied Czechoslovakia, and Slovakia was pushed into declaring independence, and so it declared its independence. And so many people in Slovakia, particularly of the sort of a nationalist right-wing ilk, regard this as being an important time when Slovakia became an independent country. Others would say this was just when it became dominated by the Nazis, but still, the moon is at 10. The moon was at 10 degrees Capricorn. Remember, this 10 degrees 16 Capricorn. I got 12:07 p.m. as a time for this. I'm not quite sure whether that's accurate. I found a Slovak newspaper that suggested 12:07 p.m. And so the new moon is at 9:44 Capricorn. So this new moon is dead on the 1939 moon of Slovakia. Now, an alternative chart for Slovakia, which those on the left in Slovakia might go for, is the beginning of the Slovak national uprising. So the Slovak national uprising started in August 29th, 1944, when the Slovaks rose up against the Nazis. It was a failure, the Slovak national uprising, but it was a symbolic moment for the Slovaks when they stood up against the Nazis, and it happened roughly at the same time as the Warsaw uprising, and it happened at 8 p.m. around the town of Banská Bystrica in Slovakia, and the moon, again, 10 degrees 7 Capricorn. And so the new moon, today, it hits the Slovak national uprising's moon. So, again, it hits Slovakia again. The final time when and also a third chart for Slovakia is when after the fall of communism, you had Czechoslovakia, got rid of communism, and then it split. It was an amicable split, and it happened on January the 1st, 1993, at midnight. And so you could argue the Czech Republic has exactly the same chart. And again, the sun is at 10 degrees 33 Capricorn. So this 10 degrees 33 Capricorn number is just coming up again and again and again. And the Prime Minister of Slovakia, he was the one who was shot earlier in the year, who managed to survive. He's just visited Moscow. A lot of people have problems with Fico, particularly those who are supporters of Ukraine. you know, Fico was an old communist. I think he was a member of a communist party just before communism fell, and so he has this natural sympathy with Russia, and there's a suggestion that Slovakia might be a neutral ground where there could be peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. But he's in the firing line, and Slovakia is in the firing line. And so this new moon is now, as far as this new moon is hitting all the 3 Slovak charts, as I've just shown. Now, as far as Fico is concerned, looking at Robert Fico's chart, I don't have a time of birth for him, but at noon September the 15th, 1964, when he was born, the moon was at 9:37 Capricorn. Okay, it's unlikely that his moon is exactly at 10 degrees Capricorn, but his moon is in Capricorn. So this new moon is potentially hitting him. So I think that this new moon could have a very big impact on Slovakia and Robert Fico and his government, and you can imagine how much pressure he's going to be under. I mean, it may be fortunate, I suppose, if Slovakia can be the centre of things, if Slovakia can be the place where peace talks between Russia and Ukraine can happen. But on the other hand, I think that I'm sure there are a lot of people that want to get rid of Fico, or are really gunning for Fico, and so I think Slovakia, with this new moon, the government has to be careful. I mean, I don't want to sort of say that Fico was a wonderful person. I mean, there are some ghastly things happening in Slovakia. There is this, there's this area in Bratislava, which is I think they're planning on cutting down 150,000 trees in Bratislava near the Danube, and one wonders how they're going to make some kind of port. It's an industrial centre. I'm not quite sure what, but it's an environmental catastrophe, and I wonder, what is going on. I mean, what does Robert Fico think? The trouble is if you're in Bratislava, is that Fico's party doesn't really care much about Bratislava, because in Bratislava they don't vote for his party, because in Bratislava they're all sort of more European, westward looking, and so Bratislava is rather different from the rest of the country. So from an environmental perspective, Fico, it doesn't seem to be doing too much for his country. Anyway, I don't know too much about what's happening in Bratislava, but it does seem pretty disastrous. But I think this new moon could have an impact on Slovakia, and I think it could have an impact on Robert Fico. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.